Have you ever stumbled upon a secret so unsettling that it shatters everything you thought you knew? Imagine the quiet comfort of your home suddenly twisting into a labyrinth of fear and suspicion. That's exactly what happened to me the day I found a hidden box tucked away beneath the bed my wife and I shared. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day, but the moment I lifted that box, everything changed. The calm, gentle woman I had built my life around was no longer the person I thought she was. What I uncovered inside was far darker and far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Inside the box were photographs, but not just any photographs. Each one was partially burned, the edges charred as if someone had tried to erase the memories they captured. As I sifted through them, a chilling pattern emerged. Each face belonged to someone who died under mysterious, accidental circumstances. At first, I brushed it off, desperate to believe it was just a cruel coincidence. But the more I looked, the harder it became to ignore the unsettling truth staring back at me from those faded images. You might wonder, what kind of secret could someone hide in a place so close to home? What if the people in those photos weren't just random victims, but pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to be part of? And then, just when I thought I had reached the worst of it, I found a new photograph, one that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of me, smiling, with a handwritten note scrawled beneath it. The next memory, that moment when I realized I was meant to be the next in a deadly pattern, was the moment fear took hold like never before. I was living under the same roof as a woman whose past was riddled with secrets darker than any nightmare. Can you imagine the terror of knowing your own life might be the next to end in a way no one would suspect? If you've ever felt the unsettling weight of doubt creeping into your most trusted relationships, you'll understand the storm that erupted inside me. This wasn't just about betrayal or lies. It was about survival. Stay with me as I take you deeper into this haunting discovery. The story of how a hidden box beneath a bed revealed a chilling truth, and how the line between love and danger became terrifyingly thin. What I found inside that box would change everything, and what I'm about to share next might just surprise you. As I carefully lifted the lid, the faint scent of dust mixed with something more unsettling. A metallic tang that prickled at the back of my throat. Inside was a collection of letters, brittle and yellowed with age, their edges curled as if reluctant to reveal the secrets they held. Each envelope was marked with dates spanning over a decade, their ink faded but still legible. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what these words might uncover, the invisible threads connecting past to present. If you're sitting here with me, feeling that same chill or curiosity, I'd love to hear what strikes a chord with you. Maybe it's the idea that beneath the surface of the people we think we know, there are depths we never imagined. Or perhaps it's the way a single discovery can ripple through everything, forcing us to question what we believed safe and true. If this story resonates with you, don't hesitate. Drop a comment below sharing what moved you the most, or any experience you've had that echoes this kind of hidden truth. Your voice adds layers to this conversation, and together, we turn these solitary moments into a shared journey. And if what you're watching sparks something inside, a flicker of connection or the urge to understand more, showing that support by liking the video helps the story find others who need to hear it. It's not just about numbers. It's about building a community where stories like this can breathe and grow, where no secret remains buried in silence. So, if you want to keep unraveling this mystery with me, subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll be the first to know when the next piece falls into place. Because it's your presence here, your thoughts, your reactions, that fuels this exploration and gives it meaning beyond the screen. Let's keep going together. For years, the rhythm of our days unfolded with an eerie regularity, a pattern so consistent it almost felt artificial. She was always there before me in the mornings, the house filled with the scent of fresh coffee and something baked, usually cinnamon or apple, something that reminded me of simpler times. Her presence was a constant, a quiet assurance that, no matter the chaos outside, inside these walls, there was order. I never questioned it. The notes she left on the kitchen table, the little reminders to pick up milk or call her mother, they seemed so innocuous, so grounded in everyday life, that I never stopped to read between the lines. It wasn't just the routines. It was the way she smiled when she looked at me, like she was harboring a secret that was too precious to share. At the time, I interpreted it as affection, a private joke between us. But what I failed to see was the calculated nature behind those expressions. They were rehearsed, like a script she'd memorized to keep me at ease, to prevent me from digging too deep. There was something almost clinical in how she managed to maintain this facade of normalcy, as if she were performing for an audience of one me. The neighborhood mirrored our domestic tranquility. Quiet streets, manicured lawns, neighbors who exchanged pleasantries but never pried. People waved from behind curtains, their eyes darting away the moment I met their gaze. I should have noticed the tension beneath the surface, the way the shadows seemed to linger a little too long in the corners of the streetlights. But I was too wrapped up in my own bubble, convinced that the calm was real and that the threats were only outside our door. Even our conversations followed the same predictable path. She'd ask about my day, genuinely or not, and I'd respond with mundane details about work or errands. Sometimes, I tried to probe deeper, to talk about feelings or future plans, but she'd deflect or change the subject with such ease that I stopped trying. It was like talking to a wall that smiled back. The silence between us was thick, but it was never uncomfortable, just familiar. That's the thing about routine. It can dull suspicion, anesthetize doubt. I remember one evening, a rare night when the power went out and the entire block was swallowed by darkness. We sat in the living room with only the flickering light of candles, and for the first time in years, she seemed unsettled. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for mine, and her smile faltered. I wanted to ask what was wrong, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I thought about how fragile that moment was, how the illusion of perfection could shatter with the slightest disturbance. There were moments, tiny and fleeting, when the mask slipped, when a glance lingered too long on the window, or when a phone call ended abruptly as I entered the room. But I brushed them aside, attributing them to stress or fatigue. It was easier to believe in the narrative I had constructed than to face the possibility that everything was an elaborate deception. After all, she was the anchor in my life, the one constant in a sea of uncertainty. Looking back, I realized the house itself was a stage designed to keep me blind. The carefully curated environment, the predictable patterns, the subtle manipulation of my perceptions. All of it served to create a bubble of safety that was anything but real. The real story, the one hidden beneath the surface, was waiting to be uncovered. But I was trapped by my own willingness to accept the comfortable lie. The truth was already there, lurking in the shadows of our shared life, ready to emerge from the darkness and rewrite everything I thought I knew. At night, the house seemed to shift, as if the walls themselves were breathing in sync with her restless mind. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and the faint sound of her footsteps would echo down the hallway. A slow, deliberate rhythm that didn't belong to someone just passing through. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of her silhouette standing near the doorway, unmoving, almost like a statue carved from shadow. The air would grow colder then, though the thermostat hadn't changed, and I'd convince myself it was just a trick of the mind. After all, who stands there watching like that without a reason? Her habits weren't ordinary. Doors locked without explanation, lights flicked on and off at odd hours, and the quiet murmur of whispered words I never caught fully. I remember once finding a small, crumpled piece of paper tucked between the pages of a book she left on the coffee table. A hurried scrawl of numbers and letters that meant nothing to me but hinted at something secretive, something coded. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Just nonsense," she said, but the tension in her voice betrayed her words. News reports about accidents or disasters always made her uneasy. A minor fire downtown, a car crash on the highway, things that would barely register with most people, would send her into a quiet panic. She'd freeze, her eyes distant as if she were reliving a memory she refused to share. I tried to tease it out of her once, but the conversation ended abruptly, her gaze hardening like a shield. I left it alone, not wanting to push too far into a space she guarded so fiercely. Sometimes, when I came home late, the room felt different. Shadows seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. I'd hear the faintest whispering, just beyond the threshold of hearing, voices that didn't belong to either of us. I'd call out her name, but the house would answer only with silence. When morning came, she was always exactly where I expected her. Calm and composed, as if the night had never stirred her at all. There was a particular night when I found her standing in the hallway again, staring out the window as if waiting for someone or something. The streetlights cast long beams of light that sliced through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes swirling in the stale air. I asked her why she was awake, standing there like a sentinel, but her answer was vague, almost rehearsed. "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. The truth, I suspected, was far more complicated. I began to notice small inconsistencies in her stories. A place she claimed to have visited didn't exist on any map I could find. A job she mentioned was never confirmed by any of the contacts I checked. When I pressed for details, she'd smile and change the subject, or laugh it off with a casual remark. It wasn't until much later that I realized these fragments were pieces of a puzzle I wasn't yet prepared to solve. The more I ignored these signals, the deeper the silence grew between us. There was a weight in the air that neither of us addressed, a tension that tightened its grip with every unanswered question. I told myself it was normal for people to have secrets, to carry hidden parts of themselves away from prying eyes. But beneath that rationalization, a quiet doubt was taking root, an unease that refused to be dismissed. I tried to focus on the mundane, on the everyday rituals that masked the oddities. Morning coffee, weekend errands, the occasional movie night. Yet, even in those moments, the feeling lingered, like a shadow just beyond reach. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It was a cage, and the bars were made of silence and half-truths. Her past was a locked room I couldn't enter, no matter how hard I knocked. And while I told myself she was harmless, just different, the truth was waiting, patient, unyielding, ready to unravel every assumption I had clung to so tightly. The photographs were unsettling, not just because they showed unfamiliar faces, but because of how they were presented. The edges, charred and curling inward as if hastily ripped from some burning chaos, suggested more than mere neglect. They seemed deliberately damaged, as though someone had tried to erase what those images represented. I flipped through them, fingers trembling slightly, tracing the faded outlines of people who might have been strangers or ghosts. When I confronted her, she brushed it off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed, as she murmured, "They're just memories." But that phrase hung in the room like a warning. Her eyes darted away, shrouded in a sudden, inexplicable tension. It was clear she wanted me to stop digging, but the silence that followed only deepened my curiosity. The house seemed to hold its breath after that. The air grew heavier, the shadows longer. I found myself drawn back to that box, to the fragile fragments of a forgotten life hidden beneath the bed. The fabric that wrapped it still smelled faintly of something smoky and old, like ash mixed with dust. It was a scent that clung to the room, stubborn and persistent, much like the secrets it concealed. I decided to take one of the photographs out to examine it more closely. It was a grainy black and white image of a man standing in front of a crumbling building, his face worn and unreadable. The background was blurred, but the architecture suggested a place far removed from the quiet neighborhood we lived in now. There was something familiar in the way the man held himself, a subtle defiance, a quiet desperation. I couldn't place it, but it felt like a key to understanding. That night, the house seemed alive with whispers. The creaks and groans of the old floorboards were no longer random noises, but part of a restless narrative. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the photograph resting on my nightstand like a silent witness to the past. The edges of the photo seemed to smolder even in the dim light, a faint reminder that some stories refused to fade quietly. Days passed, and the box remained unopened, but its presence was impossible to ignore. I started noticing small things: an old newspaper clipping tucked between the pages of a book, a letter hidden inside a drawer with the ink faded beyond legibility. None of it made sense, yet each piece felt connected, like threads woven into a tangled web. The fragments hinted at a life that was lived in shadows, far from the surface of the ordinary. One afternoon, I found myself standing outside the crumbling building from the photograph. It was on the edge of town, a forgotten relic covered in graffiti and weeds. The windows were shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. The place breathed decay and abandonment, but there was something magnetic about it. I ran my hand along the cracked brick, imagining the stories those walls could tell if they could speak. I wondered if she had ever been here, or if the man in the photo was someone she knew or feared. The questions multiplied, each one more urgent than the last. The line between memory and reality blurred, and the past seemed to reach out with cold fingers, pulling me deeper into a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Back at the house, the photographs remained untouched, but their presence was a constant reminder that beneath the surface, something was lurking. Not just in her past, but in the very air we breathed, in the silence between words, in the spaces where light refused to settle. It was a mystery that defied explanation, a shadow cast by memories she refused to share. The box was more than just a container of old images. It was a threshold to a story unwritten, a history wrapped in smoke and ashes. And as I stood at the edge of that story, I realized that the past was not just something to be remembered. It was something that could unravel the fragile fabric of our present. The dim light of the late afternoon filtered through the blinds as I sat at the kitchen table. The photographs spread out before me like a twisted mosaic. Each image bore a haunting familiarity, faces frozen in moments of happiness that now felt like grim premonitions. The dates scribbled on the backs told a fragmented story, but the pattern was unmistakable. House fires, accidents, deaths, one after another, connected by a thread that no one else seemed to notice or care to unravel. I flipped through the stack again, the edges of the photos curling under my fingers, the weight of the truth settling heavy in my chest. I knew I had crossed a line the moment I pulled up the public records, names and obituaries. Names I never expected to encounter outside these yellowed photographs suddenly stared back at me from official documents. The sterile language of the reports: accidental death, unexplained cause, fire suspected, clashed violently with the faces I'd come to know. They weren't just strangers. They were victims, and they were connected to her, to my wife, in ways I couldn't begin to understand. My mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. Was it coincidence? A cruel trick of fate? Or something darker? The thought of her involvement, even indirectly, was something I barely let surface. But the more I dug, the more the possibility gnawed at me. I found addresses linked to some of the victims, places that, when traced on a map, formed a disjointed path through the city. A route that, if followed, might expose the truth lurking beneath years of silence. I started to map it out, tracing each location on a worn city map spread across the table. The places were scattered. Old neighborhoods, forgotten streets where buildings had been replaced or left to crumble. Each site felt like a fragment of a larger puzzle, but the picture it formed was obscured by shadows. I realized then that this wasn't just about the past. It was about how the past had been buried, layered beneath the normalcy we tried to maintain. As the evening deepened, I found myself drawn to one address in particular, a charred ruin that had once been a family home. The news archives described it as a tragic accident, the kind of story that made a headline for a day before fading into oblivion. But the photograph, a faded Polaroid she'd kept tucked between the others, showed the same house standing intact, its windows shining with warm light. There was a stark contrast between the image and the reality, a reminder of what was lost and what remained hidden. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something waiting to be uncovered there, something that would explain why these tragedies had been dismissed so easily. But going back, confronting it all, meant stepping into a web of secrets, a network of silence maintained by those who refused to see or acknowledge what had really happened. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary investigation. It was a descent into a labyrinth of forgotten stories, where smoke and memory intertwined to conceal a truth that had been deliberately erased. The faces in those photographs were more than victims. They were markers on a path that someone had tried to erase with fire and indifference. I knew I was at a crossroads. To move forward meant risking everything: the trust one thought I had, the life I believed was normal, and maybe even my own safety. But to turn away would be to live in ignorance, haunted by shadows that refused to be forgotten. Somewhere beneath the surface of those burned homes and silent obituaries lay answers, but uncovering them would require more than just looking at pictures and reading names. It demanded going beyond the records, beyond the smoke, into places where memory was fragile and the past refused to stay buried. And as the night crept in, I found myself preparing to do just that, driven not by certainty but by a restless need to understand what no one else had seen or dared to confront. If you have thoughts on what might be lurking behind these fires, or any details that seem out of place, share them below. Sometimes the smallest clues can open the door to the biggest mysteries. The shift was subtle at first, barely noticeable if you weren't watching closely. But once it settled in, it became impossible to ignore. Her presence, which had once been a quiet comfort, started to feel like a tightening noose, slowly constricting the space around me. She stopped filling the silence with chatter, the kind of aimless words that once made the night seem less heavy. Instead, there was an unsettling stillness in her. When she moved, it was with a deliberate softness, as if she was testing the boundaries of sound, making sure no one could hear her approach. I caught her standing behind me more times than I cared to admit. At first, I convinced myself it was coincidence. She was just there, part of the same room, the same shared space. But then the pattern became too consistent, her quiet footsteps tracing my movements until I started to feel like I was being watched, not just by someone physically present, but by something lurking beneath the surface. Her questions began small but carried weight I couldn't shake off. "Do you trust me?" she asked one evening, her voice low, almost a whisper. It wasn't a casual question. It felt like a test, a challenge thrown into the air with an edge sharp enough to cut through the calm. "Would you ever hide anything from me?" came next, her eyes fixed on mine with a piercing insistence that made my skin crawl. These weren't innocent inquiries. They were probes, digging into the spaces I had tried to keep private, poking at the fractures in our fragile connection. I found myself shrinking away from her gaze, the room suddenly feeling colder despite the summer heat pressing against the windows. Night was the worst. Lying beside her, I could sense her awake in the dark, the silence punctuated by the faintest sounds. Breaths held too long. A slight shift in the sheets, the almost imperceptible click of a lock or a door closing somewhere in the distance. But the most unnerving was the feeling of being stared at, that intense, unblinking focus from a presence I couldn't see but could feel hovering just at the edge of my awareness. My own mind became a labyrinth of doubt and dread, every instinct screaming to get out, to run, but the weight of the situation pinned me down. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something colder, more calculating. A sense that the space I thought I knew was transforming into a cage with walls closing in. The shift in her behavior mirrored a darker shift in the atmosphere around us, as if the room itself was swallowing light, swallowing hope. And in that shadowed space, I began to see things differently. Details that once seemed insignificant now took on an ominous clarity. The way her eyes would track me from across the room, the odd arrangement of objects on the shelves, the faint scent of something burning that didn't belong to the city's usual smoke. Even the city outside seemed to pulse with a new tension. The usual background noise, the hum of traffic, distant sirens, chatter from late-night revelers, felt distorted, filtered through a lens of suspicion and unease. I started watching the streets from the windows, noticing figures that lingered just beyond the reach of the streetlights, shadows that stretched too long and moved with a cautious deliberation. It was as if the neighborhood itself had shifted, becoming a stage for something unseen, an unfolding drama that I was reluctantly drawn into. Sleep became fragmented, a series of brief, restless episodes punctuated by vivid, disjointed dreams where reality and nightmare blurred. In those dreams, her silhouette morphed into something unrecognizable. Sometimes a predator, sometimes a stranger with a smile too wide, eyes too sharp. I would wake gasping, heart pounding, only to find her lying still beside me, the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. And through it all, the question remained: what had changed her? Was it something I had done, or something that had always been there, waiting to emerge? The answer felt just out of reach. a shadow flitting at the edge of my vision, impossible to grasp but impossible to ignore. The lines between trust and suspicion blurred, and with every passing day, the space between us grew colder, darker, and more dangerous. If you've noticed details that didn't quite fit or sensed shifts in the atmosphere that others might have missed, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Sometimes, what feels like paranoia is just the mind tuning into signals that don't yet have a name. I stared at the photograph again, my heart hammering in a way that was neither fear nor excitement, but something in between, an unsettling recognition of a boundary crossed. The kitchen behind me looked like any other moment caught on camera, but the caption beneath, scrawled in her unmistakable handwriting, was a cipher I couldn't ignore. The next memory. I rifled through the box once more, desperate to understand what this meant. There had to be some explanation, a trick of light, a forgotten memory of taking the picture myself. But the images weren't mine to command. They were fragments of a narrative I was suddenly trapped inside, a puzzle that had been arranged long before I realized I was part of it. The realization settled like a weight. I was not just living alongside her. I was a subject within her story, one she was crafting carefully, deliberately. The previous victims, the fires that had consumed their lives and homes, the strange disappearances. None of it had been random. It was a pattern, and now I was the focal point. The idea was suffocating, and I could feel the walls of our apartment closing in. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of the light, felt like a signal that time was running out. I tried to piece together the timeline. When had the photos started appearing? Why had I never noticed them before? The box itself had been tucked away in the corner of the closet, hidden beneath old sweaters and forgotten paperwork. It was as if she had been waiting for me to find it, for me to understand my role. The thought that she might have been watching me, documenting me without my knowledge, sent a cold shiver down my spine. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to the small, violent dramas that unfolded in its shadows. The faint hum of traffic and the distant wail of sirens were reminders that this was just one story amid countless others, but it felt intensely personal. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the dull ticking of the clock on the wall, these sounds now felt like accomplices to a larger, sinister plot. I began to examine the photographs one by one, searching for clues in the background or subtle details I had missed. There was a recurring motif, an object, a symbol almost imperceptible that connected each image. A faded postcard pinned to the fridge in one, a cracked coffee mug in another. Small, everyday things that should have meant nothing, but now seemed like breadcrumbs leading deeper into a maze. The more I looked, the more I sensed a parallel world where reality bent and shifted. The faces of neighbors, the patterns on the wallpaper, even the way the light fell across the room all took on new significance. It was as though I had stumbled into a film noir, where every shadow could hide a secret and every reflection was a distorted truth. I tried to reach out to call someone, anyone, but the words caught in my throat. Who could I trust when the line between ally and adversary had blurred so completely? The phone lay on the table, silent and useless. Even the digital world, where information should have been a refuge, felt compromised. Night fell and the apartment grew colder. The city outside was a grid of lights, each window a story, a secret, a mystery. Yet here, inside these four walls, the greatest enigma was the woman I thought I knew, and the role she had assigned to me without my consent. I sat back down, the photograph still clutched in my hand, as the silence settled around me like a shroud. The question was no longer if I was part of her story, but what that story would demand of me next. Right below, I'm on this journey too. The air between us thickened, charged with something unspoken yet undeniable. Her presence filled the room like a shadow stretching across the floor, dark and silent, yet impossible to ignore. I wanted to speak, to ask how she knew, why she had waited until now, but my voice caught somewhere deep in my throat. Instead, I held the photograph tighter, as if that fragile piece of paper might anchor me to reality. She stepped forward, slow and deliberate, the faintest creak of the floorboards the only sound breaking the stillness. Her eyes never left mine, those calm, steady eyes that held no rage but a depth of knowing that unsettled me. "You think this is about what you've found," she said quietly, "but it's about what you haven't yet." The words hung in the air, bending the space between us. I realized then that this wasn't just about secrets buried in a box or memories locked away in photographs. It was about a story that had been unfolding long before I even understood my place in it. I had been caught in a narrative where the lines between observer and participant blurred until they vanished entirely. She moved again, this time to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to reveal the sprawling cityscape beyond. The grid of lights seemed less like a comforting map and more like a labyrinth, each illuminated square a cell in a sprawling prison of unseen forces. "You think you're piecing it together from the outside," she continued, "but you're already inside. You always have been." Her words were a key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. The memories I'd sifted through, the clues I'd chased, they weren't just artifacts of her past but threads woven into the fabric of my own existence. The photograph in my hand wasn't just an image. It was a marker, a signal flashing in the dark, demanding recognition. I tried to step back, to create distance between us, but the room seemed to contract, walls closing in like the narrowing passage of a forgotten tunnel. The familiar space had transformed into a chamber of secrets, each breath heavier than the last. The city outside, with its relentless hum and flickering lights, felt distant, like a world I once knew but was no longer part of. She turned away from the window, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of neon beyond. "You were never meant to find this on your own," she said, voice low but firm. "There are patterns you're meant to see only when you're ready. Patterns that demand you step beyond the role you thought you had." Her certainty was a force, an unyielding current pulling me beneath the surface of things I had only skimmed before. The photograph, the box, the hidden memories, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, one that was less about revelation and more about involvement. I was no longer just a spectator. I was a participant in a script that had been written long before I walked into the room. A sudden noise from the street below, a car door slamming, footsteps echoing against the pavement, broke the spell. For a moment, the ordinary world intruded, reminding me of the thin veil between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen. But the shift inside was irreversible. The moment had turned, the axis of my understanding tilted, and there was no turning back. She looked at me again, her gaze now softer but no less intense. "This isn't just your story to uncover," she said. "It's your story to live." The weight of those words settled over me, a quiet summons to move beyond questions and into action. The photograph slipped from my fingers, fluttering down onto the floor like a fallen leaf caught in a current. I bent to retrieve it, the edges worn and fragile, a tangible connection to the mysteries that now bound us. Outside, the city continued its restless murmuring, indifferent to the shifts within this small room. But inside, the air was charged with a new gravity, a pull toward a destiny neither of us had fully grasped. Yet, if the photograph was a gateway, then the path ahead was obscured, winding through shadows and half-truths. And as I looked up, meeting her steady gaze once more, I knew that whatever came next would demand more than silent watching. It would require stepping into the story itself, leaving behind the comfort of uncertainty for the raw edge of what was real. The night deepened outside, and with it, the line between memory and reality blurred further, drawing me inexorably forward. What lay beyond that threshold was unknown, but there was no denying the invitation was now mine to accept or refuse. And in the quiet that followed, only one thing was certain. I was on this journey too. If you've encountered moments where the familiar suddenly feels charged with unseen meaning, share your thoughts below. Sometimes the quietest revelations come from the most unexpected places. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every step I took, the air thickening as though the house itself was breathing down my neck. Shadows stretched and flickered, cast by the dim light that barely filtered through the cracked window panes. I could hear the scrape of her shoes on the hardwood, slow and measured, like a predator stalking its prey in the dark. The rhythm was relentless, a pulse I couldn't shake, echoing through every corridor and corner. This was no longer a home. It was a labyrinth designed not to shelter, but to ensnare. I reached for the doorknob of the room I'd been in moments before, only to find it cold and unyielding. The lock clicked softly, a whisper of finality that set my nerves alight. Somewhere behind me, the faint creak of a floorboard betrayed her approach, and the panic that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into sharp, urgent clarity. There was no time to think, no room for hesitation. I had to move, had to find a route out before the house's silence broke into something far worse. The hallway stretched ahead, a narrow channel between walls scrawled with peeling paint and shadowed stains that looked like old wounds. I stepped forward, each footfall loud enough to betray my position, each breath a ragged gasp that seemed to invite discovery. The geometry of the house was unfamiliar now, angles shifting in a way that made me question whether I'd ever truly known it. The familiar was distorted, warped by her presence and the weight of what had come between us. Every door I passed was a potential exit, and yet none promised freedom, only the illusion of it. I paused near the staircase, the railing cold and splintered beneath my hand. The steps spiraled upward, disappearing into the gloom above, while the basement door loomed behind me like a dark mouth waiting to swallow me whole. The choice was a cruel one: ascend into the unknown or descend into a place where light dared not linger. The house was a riddle, and the answer was a matter of survival. Her voice echoed softly from the shadows, a murmur threaded with menace. It wasn't a shout, nor a demand. It was something worse. An invitation to surrender, to become part of the house's dark history. I swallowed hard, the taste bitter and metallic in my mouth. The walls seemed to pulse with her presence, as if she was there, just beyond sight, orchestrating every move, every breath. I could almost feel her gaze piercing through the gloom, tracking me with an intimacy that was suffocating. The memory of her smile, once warm and familiar, twisted into something cold and distant. It was a mask now, a tool of control rather than connection. I realized then that leaving wasn't just a matter of crossing a threshold. It was severing the invisible threads that tethered me to this place, to her. The house had become a prism through which every memory fractured, reflecting back pain and fear in jagged shards. I darted toward the kitchen, the one room where the windows refused to stay shut tight. The glass was cracked but not broken, and beyond it, the night stretched wide and unyielding. A gust of wind rattled the panes, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and something else. Something metallic like rust or old blood. The outside world beckoned, chaotic and unpredictable, but still a promise of escape. Behind me, the slow steps resumed, more deliberate now, like a countdown ticking closer to zero. The house wasn't just a trap, it was a stage, and I was a player in a script written long before I arrived. Each corner turned was a line memorized, each shadow a cue to freeze or flee. I felt the walls lean in, the air grow heavier, the silence lengthen into a void that threatened to swallow me whole. I glanced at the window again, imagining the climb down the ivy that curled along the house's exterior, the rough bark scraping my palms, the cold night air biting at my skin. The unknown awaited, unpredictable and raw, but it held one truth the house could not: freedom. The door was no longer just wood and metal. It was a boundary between confinement and release. A sudden noise, a soft thud, a breath caught in the throat of the darkness, made my heart seize. I wasn't alone, and I never had been. This was no ordinary chase. It was a battle of wills, an invisible war fought in the silence between footsteps and shuttered windows. The house had her inside, her spirit etched into every corner, every creak, every flicker of light. And if I stayed, I would become another ghost trapped within its walls, another story erased by time but never truly gone. Right below, I'm on this journey too. If you've made it all the way here, then you're right there with me, feeling the weight of the silence, the pulse behind every shadow. This isn't just a story I'm telling. It's a path we're walking together. And honestly, having you along makes all the difference. If you found something useful or meaningful in this, then maybe sticking around is worth it. I'd love for you to join the community here, so if you feel like it, hitting that subscribe button is a simple way to keep the conversation going. No pressure, just a quiet invitation to stay connected and explore more stories like this, where the unseen threads tie us all together. And hey, if you've been watching until the very end, why not leave a comment? Something like, "I'm on this journey too." Lets me know you're here, really here, and it's always a good feeling to hear from someone who's been through it alongside me. While you're at it, a like on the video feels a bit like a handshake between us, acknowledging the shared moments, the quiet understanding. It's a nod to the connection we've built, subtle but meaningful. There's actually another video right here that dives deeper into what we've just touched on. It's like the next chapter waiting for you, quietly inviting you to click and keep moving with me. No rush, just a gentle nudge to keep the story alive if you're curious. Thanks for being here, for listening, for being part of this journey. I'm on this journey too.